Hey everyone, welcome to this week's edition of ECH Debate. Right off the bat, before I even introduce us, let's go ahead and get this out of the way. We are both wearing some different things today, as you might have noticed. I, I, Dylan, have my Pittsburgh Penguins of Evgeny Malkin jersey on, and RJ, you've got your Logan Couture Sharks jersey on, and that's because this week we're talking about, you know, when the Kraken come, what are we gonna do as far as our old favorite teams? Right, I am a Penguins fan. RJ, you're a Sharks fan, and this is something that's come up. We've talked about it a couple times. We've had questions asked about it in the comment section of these videos, and I just think that it's something that we should have a discussion about, and it's definitely something I want to hear your thoughts about, everyone. So I'll go ahead and start off with I'm a Penguins fan, even though I've never lived in Pittsburgh. When I was young, I chose all of my favorite teams based off of logos and mascots. So I chose the Penguins because at the time, it's a hockey playing penguin. Like, what's better than that? I was probably 4 at the time, and that's like the perfect logo to get a 4-year old to like your team. So I ended up a Pittsburgh Penguins fan. It's worked out pretty well so far for me. Hasn't worked out so great in football, where I ended up a Cincinnati Bengals fan. So it is not a perfect system, my system. But I've been a Penguins fan since for forever because of that. And one of the things that comes up when I think about what I'll do when the Kraken come is, well, I guess first off, I have a little bit of an easier time because the Penguins are in the Eastern Conference. So barring a Stanley Cup final match, I won't have to worry about like conflict of interest rooting wise too much. But I think for a lot of us, the big thing will be for those of us that had teams that we were really passionate about. One of the things that's going to have to happen for us is I don't think it's going to be quick as far as shifting allegiances over, or becoming just as passionate about the Kraken as we were about our old teams, because a lot of why we're so passionate and why we feel so connected to our old teams is because of the shared experiences that we've had with them. And I think that's one of the magic things about sports in general, and about being a fan of sports, is when your team does something, when your favorite players do something, when they have success, when they have, a come from behind victory or an overtime winner, you feel a part of it. Because even, if you're in the building, we all know as sports fans, there is something to that experience of being in the building when something special happens. But even watching at home, right? Like, we've all experienced that feeling of joy when we see our teams win a championship. Maybe not you Sharks fans, but it's something that is, one of my anthropology teachers always equated sports to religion, in the sense that it a lot of times it plays off of the same things. There's that symbolism, there's that passion that we have for it. We go to our places of ritual, i.e. the arenas, and I think, as we learn to, I don't want to say learn to love the Kraken, but as we experience things with the Kraken, we'll slowly build up to that same level of passion. But I don't think it'll be there just day one, just because it's the Seattle team. Obviously, I'm not big on hometown stuff because my favorite teams are littered all over the country because I chose based off of logos. But I just think that, it's really hard for me to be able to be like, yes, I'm all in as a Kraken fan now, when they still don't even have a single player on the team. And I think, certainly I've talked many times about how I think the expansion draft is going to help with that, but I think ultimately it's going to take seeing them play. It's going to take those moments that are special and unique to the Seattle Kraken, that'll win us over as fans, right? We all have those moments with our previous teams. We all have the times we were there for the big comeback. We all have the times that we shared in the big emotional defeat with our team, right? And those emotions don't really go away just because there's a new team in your hometown. And but I'm not saying that we're not going to be Kraken fans or anything like that. I just think it's going to be something that takes a little time. If you think about it like a relationship, right? This is kind of like we're leaving a partner to go to a new partner, and in a lot of ways we're only leaving for that new partner because they moved to town, right? Like it's I know it's a rough analogy, but in a lot of ways that's what we're doing, right? We're like breaking up with our old team to support this new team just because they're closer, right? And it's not because they did something to us, it's not because they wronged us in some way. It's just because of something as simple as geography. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I do think that that's ultimately what's going on, and I think that's ultimately what we all have to deal with emotionally when it comes to switching allegiances, or certainly working the Kraken into our hockey fandom. So that's kind of my initial take on it. I know that was a little rambling, but that's how I feel. What about you, RJ?
Right. And I guess, using that relationship analogy, it's tough when, if you live in Seattle, there wasn't a team there for the relationship. It's
Mm-hmm.
kind of being forced to have this long distance relationship, because there's no one around. But now there's going to be someone around that you can live with and see every day and visit every day. And it just makes sense.
Right.
And for me, I grew up as a Sharks fan. As young as I could remember, my parents would take me to Sharks games. They're originally from the Bay Area, and I lived in the LA area most of my childhood. So I went to a lot of Sharks at Kings games. And, of course, growing up around Kings fans and going to Kings games, as big a rivals as those two were, reflexively, you kind of want to, defend your team. It gets you more into it,
Mm-hmm.
for sure. And yes, I had, felt like a front row seat to those heartbreaking teams, all through the late 2000s, in the 2010s. The two of us went to Game 6 in
Mm-hmm.
2016, where the Sharks, where the Penguins won the Stanley Cup against the Sharks. That's definitely a memory I'll always have.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing that's cool being in Seattle is I think there are a lot of Sharks fans in the area. If you had lived in Seattle and you were looking for another team, pre-Kraken, the Sharks are one of those teams that makes sense. They're the closest American team geographically. And I've seen, videos from the famous Game 7 against Vegas of people at the Angry Beaver here in Seattle, and it's just packed with Sharks fans. So I think I'm not alone in this, particular struggle. And I don't know if this is the story with anyone else, but I've been watching a lot of hockey this season to prep for the expansion draft. And of course, a lot of Sharks hockey too, as I always do. And for me, I've just found myself, as I focus on the rest of the league and who the Kraken are going to draft, those Sharks storylines that, before the Kraken really came into being and I've been like laser focused on, I've kind of lost some interest. And when thinking to myself about it, the biggest reason I could think of for why that is that where the Sharks are in their competitive cycle, and that core of players that I grew up cheering for are pretty much gone. Joe Thornton first and foremost, Pavelski. It feels like Barlow's been gone for 5 years, even though he's still on the roster. The team today doesn't really feel like the team that I grew up rooting for anymore. So even though the Sharks and Kraken are probably on a collision course, for a rivalry, they're in the same division. The Sharks did not get along very well with the last expansion team in Vegas. So it makes it a little easier to not have that conflict of interest that I know would otherwise come up. If Joe Thornton was still on the Sharks and he's making his last run at a cup next year and he's got to go through the Kraken in a playoff series, there's probably a big part of me saying, hey, he deserves this one, it's his turn now. But, that's not really the case. I'd imagine it might be tougher for, say, a Canucks fan in Seattle who rooted for them because they were the closest team geographically and who maybe fell in love with Pettersson and Hughes and kind of really is invested in what becomes of them and their story. So, I mean, that leads me a question for you. I know Crosby and Malkin are still there, still trying to win cups. I mean, do you agree with that kind of line of thinking as far as, connection to the old team based on the core that you grew up with?
Yeah, 100%. That's one of the things, right? I've been talking all along with the Kraken is what makes a team real and what we invest in are the players of that team, right? Um, and I think, your example with the Sharks is perfect as to how that stuff ebbs and flows as, that core that you grew up experiencing comes and goes. Crosby and Malkin have been in Pittsburgh since I was 11, and I turn 27 next month. Right, I've spent more of my life rooting for the Penguins with those two players on the team than I have without them being there, and so that makes it a lot harder to just flip the switch and be like, oh well, I'm now a Kraken fan, while they're still going on. Whereas, as you said, that Sharks core that has been around almost your whole life isn't really there anymore, and so it's kind of it is more of a natural. I don't want to say like breaking away point, but that's really
Transition
what it
point.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah, transition. So I do think that's a huge part of it. I think sports in general, one of the things, and you could argue about the origins of this. I would say certainly fantasy sports has played a big role in this. Is I think a lot of sports fans in general are starting to become more fans of individual players than of teams, right? We're finding guys that we want to root for, that we like on and off the playing field or ice in this case. We're following them on social media. We're learning more about their lives than we ever have before. Certainly in a sport like football, right, where you probably invested fairly heavily in some sort of fantasy football league with coworkers or neighbors or friends, and it makes you fans of the players more so than the team. And hockey doesn't have it quite as much as other sports, but certainly you look at like the NBA, it's very rare for you know players of any level, superstar or bench players, to hang around on a team more than 4 or 5 years at this point, right? Almost all of the top superstar players in the NBA, those that aren't still on rookie contracts, have played on multiple teams already in their career, and I think that also contributes to some of that feeling. So,
And I
yeah,
think,
go ahead.
um, and I think that with Seattle hockey fans, they might have chosen a more player focused rooting preference already. If
Hmm.
you're a Thunderbirds fan, say, I've seen plenty of Thunderbirds fans that they've kind of followed those Thunderbirds players to whichever team they've gone to. You're not so much a Golden Knights or a Islanders fan, but you're a Shea Theodore fan, you're a Matt Barzal fan, you're a Keegan Kolazar fan, and you can have more of a player focused lens that way.
Yeah, exactly. So I think a lot of it has to do with that. I think, as I said before, I think as we're able to experience Kraken games, as we're able to go to the arena, to be around that like-minded group of fellow fans, as we're experiencing things watching that team, all of those feelings that we have for our old teams will come back around. Only they'll be attached to the Kraken, right? We'll feel just as hopeful every year going into a season. We'll feel just as disappointed when things don't go their way. We'll feel just as elated when they win or make the playoffs, or hopefully win a Stanley Cup, right? Um, but but yeah, I mean it's an interesting thing. I I would love to hear all of your thoughts down in the comments about this, about what you plan to do as far as your rooting interest when it comes to your old team. You know, one of the things I'll have to figure out is, yeah, season one, Pittsburgh will come into town, right? At some point. What do I do? I don't know. I honestly don't know yet. Um, so it's an interesting thing. It's something that, yeah, it's unique to this experience. It's something we didn't really see in Vegas because Vegas didn't have any professional sports team. So I have a lot of family that lives in Vegas, and when the Golden Knights came, everybody left their old allegiance because it was the first time they had their team, right? It was the first time they had a team that they could call their own. They'd never had that before. Seattle doesn't exactly have that, problem, right? We have teams in literally everything else except the NBA. So um, it'll be interesting. So yeah, let us know down in the comments what your thoughts are, what your opinions are, what you plan on doing when the Kraken have to play your team for the first time. If there'll still even be your team at that point, or if you're already all in on the Kraken now. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our future Kraken news or these ECH debate videos, and we'll see you next time.